the more intersectional identities that you have that are marginalized, so the more, like if you look at race, gender, and disability, the more that they intersect, the more likely it is that there's going to be suboptimal outcomes. You're going to look at the likelihood that that person is going to have the same type of educational attainment as someone who isn't that race or isn't that gender or both is different. The likelihood that they're going to be a homeowner or they're going to not be in the criminal justice system, or all of the different, markers, social determinants tend to be at higher risk.
Welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. I'm your host, Debbie Reber. On this week's episode, I am talking with powerhouse Morénike Giwa Onaiwu. Morénike is a global advocate, educator, disabled person of color, non-binary woman, and parent of children on the autism spectrum in a neurodiverse, multicultural, twice exceptional, serodifferent family. She's a prolific writer and social activist whose work focuses on intersectional justice, meaningful community involvement, human rights, and inclusion. Morénike has presented at the White House, the UN, and numerous conferences, and her work has been featured in the New York Times, Psychology Today, Atlantic, The Today Show, and much more. Morénike was the first Black woman to chair the NIH-funded Global Community Advisory Board for HIV Clinical Research and the first Black Executive Board of Directors member of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network and Autistic Women and Non-Binary Network. I could go on and on listing credentials because Morénike's work is so impressive and so extensive. For this conversation, we focused on what it was like for Morénike to get her autism diagnosis as an adult, the valuable knowledge that parents can receive from other autistic adults, the impact of getting diagnosed late for Black and brown kids, and how intersectionality can help us understand the consequences of an autistic diagnosis in marginalized communities. Such a rich conversation. I hope you enjoy it. And a quick reminder that with this season of the podcast, I've also just launched Playback Fridays, whereby every Friday I'll be re-releasing a powerful episode from my library. Tune in for episodes with people like the Out of Sync Child author Carol Kronowitz, author of The Explosive Child, Dr. Ross Green, Neurotribes author Steve Silberman, my original Asher specials, and episodes on things like navigating tricky dynamics with family who don't get it, transitioning to homeschool, and so much more. If you're already subscribed to this podcast, you don't have to do anything. Just keep an eye out for new episodes on Fridays showing up in your podcast feed. Lastly, I want to give a quick shout out to new supporter of the podcast, Sarah Weiner. Thank you so much for joining my Patreon community and helping me cover the cost of producing this show. If you get a lot out of this podcast and want to join Sarah in supporting it, you can sign up with Patreon to contribute as little as $2 a month. To learn more, visit patreon.com/tiltparenting. Thanks so much. And now here is my conversation with Morénike. Hello, Morénike. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Oh my goodness, there's so much that we could talk about today, and I'm just really excited to have a rich conversation with you. And I'm assuming that there are going to be listeners who are unfamiliar with who you are in the world and the work that you do. So I was wondering if you could start by telling us a little bit about your own personal story and how it kind of led you to be doing the work that you do today.
Sure. Well, first, hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate your time and your interest. So my name is Morénike, and I am involved in a lot of disability justice advocacy and social justice work as a person who's neurodivergent and a parent of disabled and neurodivergent children. But I guess some of it kind of came about, I would say by accident, but I don't think there really are any accidents. But essentially, I was born in the United States in the Midwest. My parents were immigrants from West Africa, came from here for college, ended up kind of stuck here because of this one military coup or another going on. And so didn't really feel comfortable bringing us kids who were born in America. And that was kind of what we knew, kind of, I guess, spoiled into, political unrest. And so they were waiting things out, and it kept waiting, and it just looked like, okay, looks like we're going to be here for some time. Let's get out of this cold and snow. And we moved to Texas. And so I, finished school there. And then, I went off to college and kind of lived my life. And so in all of these different experiences that we had, like when we were in the Midwest moving around for this post-bac program or this preceptorship or this grad program, my brothers and I were always different. But, we attributed a lot of that difference to our parents' heritage. It's not that there weren't other, students of color or what have you. My parents, lived in international student housing for a while. So there were people around, but it wasn't the majority. But the difference it seemed like it was an okay thing. In Texas, though, is where I really noticed the difference more so than, when you're in the Midwest. And then, people talk about Minnesota nice. And then, and then we were in Missouri, Nebraska, Kansas, and we were younger. So I think things are different when you get a little older. In Texas, people were a lot more blunt about things that they didn't understand or like, or they would ask odd questions. And so for a lot of the time, I just really felt different. I felt like an outsider a lot of the time. And I did think some of it was possibly race related or whatever. And I was in gifted and talented classes. So there was some of that too, the competition with your peers. But I always felt different. I always knew I was different my whole life, but I just didn't know what exactly the difference was. And at home, it was accommodated. That's just how she is. Oh, she just does things that way. Or this is, she likes to eat on that side of the table or whatever. But outside of home, it was like this hidden weird rule to life, like a whole bunch of them that I couldn't figure out. And so I just had to learn to kind of try to play the game and pretend and figure out what to do. And so I grew up and I worked I did an AmeriCorps program and I got my undergraduate degree and I worked in the nonprofit sector for a while. And then I went back for my grad degree. And I always cared about working with the community and, those type of, those things were always really appealing to me. And I was involved in a lot of social justice related work, working with various different marginalized communities. And kind of fast forward, I became an adoptive parent and then later married. And then I became a biological parent as well. And so all of my children have various disabilities. And so in trying to learn more, trying to help them, trying to educate myself, that's what prompted me to go to graduate school because I just felt like I was on the outside looking in and I just couldn't get straight answers and wasn't taken seriously and wanted to be able to make sure that they had the best outcomes. And in learning more and advocating for them is when I kind of was pointedly asked by one of my children's providers about my own neurology. And so I'd had some other diagnoses. I'd struggled with, depression and anxiety, for a number of years when I was younger, when we were being put in the gifted classes, I had the different neuropsych testing and, cognitive testing and all of those types of things. But I was diagnosed in adulthood with ADHD and inattentive ADHD. And then later I was asked, if I had been evaluated for autism. And I was like, no. And they're like, but you're just like these two autistic kids that you have, not to mention my other children. I've one, intellectual disability. I've got, kids with ADHD. We've had a little mix, in the house and like neurodiversity central. And so I started doing some research and it really started making a lot of sense to me. I was like, okay, well, this is why I didn't pick up on this thing, or this is why this worked for me, or I wasn't alarmed when my child did this or that, because I had an understanding because a lot of it was similar to me. And so it was just really, really, it was so eye-opening. It's such a paradigm shift to realize that I'd been basically undiagnosed my entire life. It was almost like being, I don't know, like the Truman Show or something, like finding out something is completely different. Your reality was really different than what you thought it was. And I just wanted to kind of learn more and share more with others. I didn't see a lot of people that looked like me and my kids. I read a lot of things that didn't really seem right. It didn't resonate with me. And I just wanted to kind of, and I didn't really have much of a filter. So I just kind of would ask questions or share my ideas. And it just kind of started to grow, in terms of like my writing and my volunteering. And it just kind of really morphed into something that really is, I guess kind of like a bedrock of my life, so to speak. I can't see myself doing anything else. Like it's important to me to, to talk about neurodiversity, to talk about acceptance and inclusion, and to work with entities to make it happen and to empower people to try to make our world more equitable and, a more accepting place for everyone.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear your story and that you were someone who was involved in social justice work and working with marginalized communities and cause-related work. It seems like you took all of that experience and that passion, and with this new information, it was kind of like the perfect storm in a good way of being able to really affect change and be such a vocal leader in this movement.
Yes, I really think so. I feel like a lot of the experiences that I had worked with refugee communities, and I worked in, HIV treatment and prevention and Title I schools and all of these different types of programs. And so I feel like it really did kind of come together and allow me to be able to use some of the tactics and tools that I'd learned in this capacity. Like, I think about a lot of the work that I learned from some of the luminaries who, had been trained by people who were in ACT UP in the 80s, and some of the things that they had done, and how farther along they are in terms of the evolution of community involvement, engagement, and leadership, as opposed to this siloed way that it's done with, developmental disabilities and with autism. And so I felt like, if I see this happening over here, this is possible. Can't it be possible for us? Why aren't we trying this? Why aren't we doing this?
Yeah. When you were identified as being on the autism spectrum, you mentioned this kind of Truman Show moment. And I love that. I mean, there are many listeners of this podcast who have similarly discovered their own neurodivergence through going through the process with their kids, whether that's ADHD or twice exceptional or being autistic. I'm wondering if you could just talk a little more about that, because I've heard such different responses when I've talked with autistic adults who discovered as adults that was their diagnosis, what that integration was like for them.
So neurodiversity is a fact of life. And, I feel like there's a lot more neurodivergence in the population than we know. And though, of course, not every person who has an autistic child is autistic themselves, but typically generally there's some type of neurodivergence of some sort, whether it's ADHD or whether it's, like you said, being twice exceptional, whether it's, but again, not always. But I think a lot of times people come to a sense of awareness of themselves that's hard to develop when it's just you. But when you're, when you have little people that you're responsible for, and you can kind of take, I guess, a little bit more, I wouldn't even say an objective point of view, because it's your baby, but it's not you, it's external to you. So you're observing. And so for me, I had all these different little diagnoses, I had a lot of challenges when I was young with not understanding a lot of the things about life, a lot of the discrepancies between what people say and what they do, and injustice. And a lot of things were I was sensitive, and I took things very hard, and I knew I was different, and I was just really tired of the work that it took just to navigate a typical day. And so I was suicidal from the age of 11 and 12. And I had a lot of challenges, and I kind of wore different masks throughout my life. And so, I had a major depression diagnosis, and then later I acquired some other diagnoses. And so it's like every time I got one, it was almost like as if there's a smudged mirror and someone cleans it a little, and you can see a little more, and you can see a little more, but I still couldn't see clearly. And then even though I knew, okay, this impacts, or this explains this, or this kind of, I can relate to this, but it never was really enough of anything. Now, ADHD, that cleaned a lot of the mirror because I was like, wow, because in my mind, I knew about ADHD, and everybody who I knew who had ADHD, when I grew up, they were on Ritalin, and they were like the stereotypical little Dennis the Menace. That kid that you like, but he just can't stop touching everything. He can't stop talking. He can't stop running. He's always up out of his feet. It was, again, the things that people are looking for. So the stereotypical little boy who isn't standing in line properly, or, just kind of the motor thing, like that's what ADHD was. And I was like, that is so not me. I can sit quietly in the room. I can entertain myself. I can this, and I had so very little understanding of all of the ways, the fact that I my entire life lost so many pairs of keys, so many library books, textbooks, couldn't remember this, couldn't keep up with that, would go up the stairs and forget what I was going there for. Like, my mind wandered all the time. It's like I was really busy internally, but I just didn't show it. It wasn't, socially acceptable to. And so that cleared up a lot of things for me. That helped me a lot. And I was like, wow, I just had no idea that other people's brains didn't do that they're sitting down trying to think of something, and then their brain changes like with the wind, like every second. I didn't realize that wasn't the way it is for everyone. I mean, I wouldn't know any different. I started to kind of pay attention to some of the strengths that I had, like hyper focusing and things that I could do, and try to give myself supports, like things like calendars and reminders for my struggles. But autism wasn't something that I knew much about. I would say I didn't even know enough about it to really have a negative perception of it. It just really wasn't really on my radar. I knew about it from this one soap opera and a few things that I'd heard and read here and there, but I didn't really have much. It wasn't a part of my life. And so when my daughter was born, from the time she was very little, I was relieved, actually, because I didn't know what to expect, because I'd started parenting as an older, as an adoptive parent. And so I started with a 5-year-old and then a little older and so on. And then, so when I started with a newborn, everything that I'd read to prepare myself, everything I'd watched, I was just kind of concerned about what, I wanted to be a good parent, but I was just so grateful. She made sense to me. She would make certain movements, and that was a cue to me that, oh, she wants her diaper changed, or she's hungry, or she didn't like to sleep in the crib. I just felt like it didn't feel right. She preferred to sleep in the bed. She had these different ways about her, but everything made sense to me. I could I felt like we had this unspoken language, like this, this nonverbal communication that made sense to both of us. And she didn't like certain things, the sound of the vacuum cleaner or the sound of the blender. I didn't like those things either. So I just wouldn't do it. So I understood her, and she was just so easy for me. And it wasn't till I took her to a Mother's Day Out program, and they were asking me all these questions about her, and within her first week, and they were confused and they were concerned, and I didn't understand what they were concerned about. She was just fine. Seeing her through their eyes, and then getting, so going through the process and learning more about autism and the way that, I guess, the non-autistic brain thinks and all of these different things. And then kind of learning about myself, it really did feel like, like I mentioned Truman show, sometimes I mention that it's like the sixth sense at the end when, when we find out that Bruce Willis has been a ghost this entire time and you just didn't know. And then you look back and there's all these signs and all these little things, and they even show you a few of them. And I was like, wow. I looked back at so many things, and I wish that I had known. There were expectations that I had of myself that were unfair. There were times that I could have taken better care of myself, or built in some things to support myself, or advocated for myself. I just looked back in hindsight, and it made me both sad and happy. It made me sad because I saw a lot of the times that I had struggled unnecessarily, and I wished I had had this understanding. But it made me happy because I had always felt like, what the freak is wrong with me? What is it? What is this stuff? Why can't I get it? What is going on that I can't I'm just off. I'm just wrong. And I realized that wasn't the case. And that just was so freeing, to really understand, no, this is just who you are. This is just the operating system that you have. And that was something that made sense to me, because as being a parent, I had always tried to make sure to affirm my children that you're not wrong. You're just different. Okay. You're adopted, and that's not a bad thing. This is just your reality, and this is who you are. Or, okay, so this one is left-handed and most people are right-handed. So this is a little different, but that doesn't make it bad. We just have to figure out, okay, what works, get a different type of pair of scissors or whatever. So it was the same type of thing with me. It just really, I just really understood so much about myself. And it was really cathartic. It was just, I don't know, I feel like it's been one of the most monumental experiences of my life.
Wow. It sounds so powerful. Thank you for sharing that. It makes sense. And I bet there are a lot of listeners who are relating to that experience. We'll be right back after this quick break. Maybe I've watched too many seasons of The Amazing Race, but every time I have to go somewhere on the subway, I treat it like a competition. It's all about making the right gut decisions about which route will get me there the fastest. Sometimes those decisions get me where I'm going early, and other times my gambles don't really pay off. Probiotics can't help with most gut decisions, but if your gut needs a little support, Ritual has your back. Their Synbiotic Plus, a 3-in-1 supplement, has clinically studied prebiotics, probiotics, and a postbiotic to support a balanced gut microbiome. I've been using Synbiotic Plus for about 6 months now, and it's become a core part of my morning routine. I take the mini capsule every morning while making my way through my inbox, whether I'm at home or I'm on the road, because it doesn't need to be refrigerated. And the capsule itself is delayed released, which helps it survive the harsh conditions of the upper GI tract for delivery to the colon, and that's exactly where we want it to go. Ritual invested in a study modeling the human colon, which showed that Synbiotic Plus significantly increased microbial diversity and the growth of beneficial bacteria. There's no more shame in your gut game. Synbiotic Plus and Ritual are here to celebrate, not hide your insides. Get 25% off your first month for a limited time at ritual.com/tilt. Start Ritual or add Symbiotic Plus to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/tilt for 25% off. During this month of planning and organization for big transitions, rhythms and routines have been absolutely essential for our physical and emotional well-being. So Green Chef nights are reliably and predictably a good night. We know the ingredients will be fresh and prepped, the instructions easy to follow, and the meal delicious. We're all still talking about last week's turkey tacos with mango chimichurri sauce, refried beans, and Monterey Jack cheese. Green Chef contributes to a healthy lifestyle with easy and delicious menus like fresh seasonal salads and grain bowls, and with over 80 weekly meal and market options, plus rotating options to suit a variety of lifestyles, whether Mediterranean, plant-based, calorie-smart, keto, protein-packed, gluten-free. There are always plenty of options to choose from. Whatever you select, you'll get farm-fresh ingredients, organic whole fruits and veggies, and premium proteins, all delivered straight to your door. I love those 4 words, straight to my door. Oh, and one more thing I love about Green Chef, they have an app, which means it's easy to manage meal preferences and delivery from your phone if you want to. And I, for one, want to. I am in that mode where I'm making the most of little moments like waiting in line at the pharmacy or for the F train to pull into the station to tackle all of those to-dos. So the convenience of an app is key for me. Green Chef has a special offer for Tilt listeners. Go to greenchef.com/tilt50 and use code TILT50 to get 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months. That's 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months when you use the code TILT50 at greenchef.com/tilt50. This may be a good time to mention a book that you co-edited that came out, I think, in the past year called Sincerely Your Autistic Child, What People on the Autism Spectrum Wish Their Parents Knew About Growing Up, Acceptance, and Identity. It's a wonderful book. Would you take a moment to tell listeners what they would expect in reading that book?
Yeah, I'm super excited about this. So Sincerely Your Autistic Child is a project. So it was published by Beacon Press, who we love. You know, they're a social justice press. They have So You Want to Talk About Race and all these other different books. Like they have things that serious nonfiction that people don't want to talk about, and they're an independent nonprofit publisher. What happened is several years ago, I do equity consulting with Autistic Women and Non-Binary Network. And I've been involved when I became more aware of my diagnosis. I've been involved in a lot of different groups. So I'm in, some parenting groups and some self-advocate groups and some research groups and so on, like as a volunteer. And so this was one of them. And so they had created a guide, one for parents and one for youth, kind of giving like a little explanation or pointers or tips about your child's diagnosis, what to expect, and then kind of living, because, diagnosis is one period in time and then you have the rest of your life. And so people had wanted more, because a lot of what you get when my children were diagnosed, I was handed the 100-day kit. It has been revised since then, and its content is better. Though the initial one was pretty fear-mongering and not written with much understanding of neurodiversity at all. And so this was a way of, everywhere you turn, there's quote-unquote autism experts, professionals, and this and that. And then you're like, some of these people, I'm like, okay, so you've worked with students or with clients for X amount of years. You yourself are not autistic. You're not raising a child that's autistic, like your spouse is not autistic, but you're an expert. And I wouldn't ever dare say that I'm an expert on what it's like to, I don't know, I'm here in Texas and I, went to school and went to college in California. So I've always been adjacent to Mexico. I wouldn't say because I live amongst Mexican Americans and I live in an area that has a lot of Latinx influence that makes me an expert. It gives me some familiarity, but I'm certainly not an expert. It's not my lived experience. And so it just was odd to us that everyone who was giving all this advice, sometimes the advice was laughable. It really was like, what? Are you sure? Are you telling people to do that? That makes no sense. Or you think that's why that happens? Or it was sometimes it was well-meaning and sometimes it was good and helpful, but sometimes it was just completely off. And so it was like, let's give people some pointers or some feedback, things that you've learned, School of Hard Knocks style, you've made mistakes and you've learned this, or you figured this out about yourself, or this, but you were never able to express it. Let's if we could take those things, kind of like those little nuggets, and share them with people, because most parents really do want to do right by their kids, and they care, and you can figure out a lot. You don't have to share the same neurology as your child to learn about them and learn how to accommodate them and care about them to a point, but you still don't necessarily relate. So sometimes it can be nice to have that advice. And I thought about how helpful it had been for me as an adoptive parent to read the voice of adult adoptees, because I've never been adopted. And so as much as I love my kids, I love them as fiercely as I advocate for them, and as much as I feel like I'm sensitive to their experiences, it's not my lived experience. I'm adjacent to it, but it's not mine. And so I can figure some things out and learn some things, but there's always wisdom in the voices of people who've had these actual experiences. And so it's been invaluable for me, and I feel like it's made me a better parent. And so there was a book, a self-published book called What Every Autistic Girl Wishes Her Parents Knew. And so this one actually is kind of like expanding that concept. So we invited all of the people who were in the self-published book when we got the contract for this one to, if they wanted to contribute, and all except for one were able to. And then we also invited new contributors, because what we felt was there's starting to become this schism, and it's not that it hasn't been there before, but it's becoming, I think, more and more apparent, to where there's autism parents on one side and autistic adults on the other side. And I don't think we need to be on sides. We all want a lot of the same thing, which is for the things to be better for these kids, things to be better for adults, because children do turn into adults. We stay adults, we're adults most of our lives. If we're fortunate enough to live, and for society to be better. We might not always agree on the mechanism or the route or the way to describe certain things, but there's a lot of shared interest. Basically, we felt like this is a way to say, hey, affirm some things that maybe share some things that you didn't know, create this dialogue where it's not tension, and this one saying, no, you're not like my kid, and this one saying you're doing everything wrong and you're ruining your child's life. Let's have a constructive dialogue. Let's talk to parents and let them know what they're doing right, because they're doing a heck of a lot of things right that they may not realize, because people are so hard on themselves and they don't see or they don't acknowledge the areas where you're doing a great job. And then there's some areas that you can prepare for that might be coming in the future, some possibilities, some, potential risk factors, or there's certain things that you could do differently that would have a better, your child would hopefully respond better or be more at ease, or have them in a different environment. And so we describe it as kind of like part memoir, part guide, and part love letter, because there's some people in there who are writing about how their parents have been their rock, they've had their back, they've looked out for them, and how much they love and appreciate that. And so we want parents to feel seen and heard, because parenting is, they say the toughest job you'll ever love, regardless of your child's neurology. It's hard. There's no manual. You're just figuring it out, and you do the best you can, but you make mistakes. So we wanted people to be able to own that they're in this, and they're trying, and they care. And we also wanted people to not, their kids not to go through some of the things that we went through. Because if our parents had known better, a lot of us, they would have done better. And so that's the benefit of being able to have walked in those shoes before, so that others don't have to. You can deter them from the dead ends and the potholes. And so the book has people of all different backgrounds. We had a contributor that was a teenager who was unable to contribute, unfortunately, as she was working on another project. But we've got people in their early 20s. We've got people, older than that. And then we've got even, senior citizens. We've got like 2 grandparents in there. We have people who are Muslim and Jewish and agnostic and Christian and pagan. We have people who are speaking primarily. We have people who are non-speaking and type 2 communicate. We have people with advanced degrees and people who didn't even, finish high school. We have people who live independently or live with a partner, and others who live with their family, others who currently or have previously lived in congregate care or have 24-hour support, like staff with them, people of different cognitive abilities and just racial backgrounds and just a little bit of everything, because we want, the spectrum. We wanted to give a full range of what people's lives are like. Most of the people in the book, though not all, but many of them were assigned female at birth. Some of them still identify as a woman, and there are a number who do not, who identify as non-binary, or who identify as, transmasculine or gender neutral in some way. And then we have a couple of people who were assigned male at birth. But there isn't anyone in the book who was assigned male at birth and identifies as a cisgender male. And that was kind of done intentionally also, because in autism, there's so many voices. I mean, I'm grateful for the fact that we do have Temple Grandin, one of the most well-known autistic people, and is obviously not male. And so but so much about autism is focused on males, focused on male characters, focused, the perspectives of males. And there's a lot of gender diversity in autism. And there's a lot of, higher likelihood with autism and other forms of neurodivergence of the person being more likely to be, LGBTQ. And so we wanted to reflect that because I think that's something that's concerning or for parents because there's already things that they're looking into, like, okay, well, my child might be predisposed to seizures or certain types of allergies or certain types of things happening with their, joints or their mobility, suicidality or whatever. But what else should I think? What else should I know? So your child might be more likely to not identify necessarily with the gender that they were assigned at birth. And it may or may not have anything to do with their sexuality. I think that's important for parents to know when their children are young so that you don't accidentally scar them or, say things that are harmful. It doesn't have to be this controversial thing that I think a lot of people feel that it is. It's really just everything about us is like living in another country or in another planet that's different than the one everyone else is from. So it's like spending your whole life speaking a foreign language, but no one taught it to you. You had to learn it on your own or being dropped off in a planet different than the one that you come from. So you have to try to learn the rules of this new country. So it's because of that, everything's not going to fit and gel in the same way. So I think rather than being frightened of it, if parents could be aware of it, if it's not the case for your child, cool, that's fine. Have some awareness that might help someone else, that in the future, that someone else that And if it is something that, ends up being a reality for your child, you can educate yourself and you can respond in a way that hopefully won't create a rift between you and your child.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that up about gender identity and just the prevalence of autistic and other neurodivergent people being part of the LGBTQ plus community. And actually, I'm just going to say this now for listeners who are listening to this, the next week, the episode is specifically talking about gender identity and differently wired kids. So we'll be really diving into that topic. So thank you for sharing that. And I just want to say too, this book, it feels like such a generous gift for parents. It really is. It feels like a letter. It feels like you're reading a letter. You're getting like almost a dictionary or a translation guide to this other language, right? So such a valuable read if you're raising an autistic child and really want to do right by them and listen to the voices of actually autistic adults to learn from them. So it's just fantastic.
Thank you. And I'm really glad that you're going to have that topic because I think it's so important. Like there's a concept, Dr. Nick Walker has a blog, Neurocosmopolitan. And then there's Dr. Remy Yurgo, they're both autistic, has a book where it talks about, like some of the concepts of being neuroqueer. And all of these other things that autism, but other neurodivergences as well. Just I think about myself and so many people that I know. I guess the assumptions that you make, because just like with ADHD, I thought that was how everybody's mind worked. I knew with autism, although I didn't know what it was called, I knew that I was different. I knew that I could hear the buzzing sounds that no one else could hear, and that people would think that I was just making things up or being dramatic. I knew that certain things smelled really strongly to me or felt, really pleasant or unpleasant, and other people didn't notice those things. I knew certain ideas got stuck in my head. Like those were things it was quite clear to me that people didn't feel or think that way. But gender was one that was completely different. And for me, in that I just assumed that everyone, this is just what you call this thing, so for example, red is red in English, but it's rojo in Spanish, or whatever. So this is just the name or a term for things. And so, I thought about how you use the word flat in the UK, but you might say apartment, in the United States or what have you. So just things are just called things for whatever reason. Etymology can be, arbitrary. And so I just felt like if you have a vulva, you're called this. And if you have a, scrotum, you're called this. And it's not that you really feel like it or don't feel like it. It's just a name. And just kind of like parents might name their child Mary or John, and you get older and you're like, oh, I'm not a Mary, I'm a Taylor, or I'm a Sue. They picked it because they're naming you after their grandparent, or they named you after their favorite author, or you were born at a certain time of night that reminded them of this movie. But that doesn't mean that name fits you. That's what you were given, but it's just a name that you're familiar with. It may or may not be for you, and so I thought that was the case with everyone. Okay, you call this person a woman, you call this person a man, but no one really feels like it. It's just just a name. It's like clothes that you put on, and some clothes feel comfortable and some don't. To discover that people actually felt, because we know, sex, is biology, but gender is not. It's inner and social construct. And so to realize that people didn't feel that, oh, this is just a name, it doesn't really fit me. But there were people who actually felt like they identified with that name, like the concepts and the aspects of being that person and the body and all of those things. When I realized that you're supposed, I guess if it's you, then it's supposed to kind of gel, and when it didn't, I was like, oh, it was just really eye-opening. So I think that there's a lot of things about the way that we think that when you're neurodivergent that you don't realize. There's very few people that I know on the spectrum, or even people who are not on the spectrum, but, who are neurodivergent, who haven't come to kind of some understanding of, maybe their gender identity or their sexuality. And that's even if they are, identify as cisgender or as heterosexual. It's not necessarily about being queer, but it's just basically realizing that the way we experience, describe, view these things differ from that of the general population.
Yeah, such a great description of that. Thank you. We'll be right back after this quick break. Hey there, it's Debbie. I love making this show and sharing conversations about how to support our awesome neurodivergent kids. I've seen how even one little insight from an interview can spark a big shift in daily life. But I know that raising complex kids can be messy and lonely. And just when we think we figured it out, something comes up that boots us right back to feeling overwhelmed and stuck. That's why I've poured everything into creating a way for parents like us navigating complex parenting journeys to join together and chart a path that feels positive, hopeful, and doable. It's the brand new Differently Wired Club experience. In the club, you'll get personal support from me and other seasoned parent coaches, 6 live calls every month where you can connect and get your personal questions answered, the opportunity to learn directly from authors and experts like I have on this show, monthly themes for getting specific and tactical, an exclusive private podcast feed, and the best, most generous community of parents. Seriously, these folks show up for themselves and each other, and that right there is really everything, because it's a daily reminder that we're not alone. Our kids aren't broken, and we have totally got this. The recently rebooted Differently Wired Club is on a brand new platform with its very own iOS and Android app. It is such a great space. However you learn, whatever your style, no matter the ages, genders, and neurodivergent profile of your children, the Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Join us today by going to tiltparenting.com/club. That's tiltparenting.com/club. I hope to see you on the inside.
Lynn, this time of year, parenting can be such a flusterclux.
You've come to the right place. I'm Lynn Lyons, and I've been treating anxious families for over 30 years.
I'm Lynn's sister-in-law and co-host Robin Hudson.
Join us for Flusterclux, a podcast for parents who worry.
Wait, that's everybody.
Yeah, these last few years have felt like one long anxiety attack for so many.
Why do you think parents are always surprised that a podcast about anxiety relates to them, even if no one in their house has an anxiety disorder?
Well, worry is human. Everyone does it, and anxiety shows up when we face uncertainty.
All the parenting tips you've taught me have been essential.
I love to break it down into skills we need to manage worry in our families.
We've covered so many topics: depression, burnout, meltdowns, perfectionism.
Don't forget scary mothers-in-law.
Right, but of course that's not my mother-in-law.
Because that's my mother.
And a listener.
As a psychotherapist, I like to teach parents and kids how to respond to everyday moments in healthy ways.
Managing anxiety really can be taught.
It really can. And I'll even tell you what to say.
We talk about serious stuff, but without being too serious.
Anxiety wants everything serious. Anxiety doesn't stand a chance when we're laughing, even about the tough stuff.
This is a big question, but I don't want to not address this in this conversation. But I know that a big part of your work is intersectional justice. I watched a talk you gave at the UN, which I'm going to have a link in the show notes, on the panel for women and girls with autism from 2019. And you described the late diagnosis for children of color and for women as being kind of a perfect storm for a catastrophe. And so knowing who the audience is here, this is made up of parents and caregivers and educators who really want to be a part of this paradigm shift, this neurodivergent, revolution movement. Can you talk about how we can be a part of moving this forward, and specifically related to this intersectionality piece, being Black and autistic and all that goes with that?
Yes, I do. And so I feel like, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, because a lot of the time, when, these things are brought up, people are like, well, we're talking about autism, or we're talking about ADHD, or we're talking about giftedness, or this or that. Why are you bringing, why are you talking about racial issues? Not that that's not important, but what does that have to do with this? Or why are you talking about gender? And it's really because I think a lot of people don't understand that they're interwoven for so many of us. And so a marginalized identity, like a person can be upper middle class, white, cisgender, heterosexual male, that's supposed to be quote unquote, kind of like the creme de la creme, right? Like you're supposed to have it easier, even though again, every person can have different circumstances in their lives that can create hardship and challenges. Everyone has both privileges and oppressions. No one has just one or the other. If that person is autistic, or has ADHD, so having that disability, you are living a completely different life than your peer who might have all of those other characteristics that you have, but they're non-disabled. Like every single thing, like the world has now been made completely different for you. And it's like a layer has been draped over you that isn't on other people that they don't have. And the more marginalized identities that you have, the more layers that you have, maybe cloaking your vision or obscuring your way. And so Dr. Kimberlé Crenshaw, who coined the term intersectionality, is a scholar and who described an example of being at an intersection. And so if you're at the center and then there's traffic coming from every single direction, so north, south, east, and west, you can have an impact, two things at once. So north and east can collide, or west and south, or whatever. You don't know which ones are going to collide, how hard they're going to hit, which one's going to hit you first, if they're all going to hit you, but you are just basically, kind of at that center point. And that's what it is with intersectionality. It's like it's never just autism. I mean, the part of the reason why I think I went so many years undiagnosed is because, I'm a non-binary woman. So I was, raised as a assigned female at birth. So socialized as a girl, quote unquote. Even my understanding again of ADHD was gendered, of how you're supposed to be. And autism was certainly, I wasn't like Rain Man, and I wasn't like any of these, the quirky Silicon Valley guy or Sheldon or anything, Lighted Up Blue was selected in large part because of a particular gender that is, diagnosed more. So people who are women and girls are diagnosed far less frequently. They're diagnosed later, less likely to get services because people are looking out for a particular presentation. So if you don't look like what they expect autism to look like, then everyone's going to think that it's something else. So if you're a girl and you're obsessed with this band, or you're obsessed with horses or whatever, that's socially acceptable, but maybe it feels less so for someone who was assigned male at birth. And then when you look at the racial piece, there are things that are about your characteristics of neurodivergence that are going to be attributed to behavioral problems or cultural differences or anything but what they are. For me, for example, tone of voice, like a lot of autistic people, it's hard to have the quote unquote Goldilocks or whatever right tone of voice. You're either like way too loud or way too quiet some of the time. And so, but when I got loud, it wasn't seen as, having the difficulty regulating that is one of the characteristics of a disability. It was, she's Black, they're loud, they're ghetto, whatever, I'm just putting it out there. Some of the movements or stereotypy can be viewed in a particular way, in a negative way that can be very dangerous. And so a lot of what someone might recognize as a meltdown or as a self-regulation method or whatever could be seen as aggressive behavior or something. And so when you look at the fact that every time the more intersectional identities that you have that are marginalized, so the more, like if you look at race, gender, and disability, the more that they intersect, the more likely it is that there's going to be suboptimal outcomes. You're going to look at the likelihood that person's going to have the same type of educational attainment as someone who isn't that race or isn't that gender or both is different. The likelihood that they're going to be a homeowner or they're going to not be in the criminal justice system, or all of the different, markers, social determinants tend to be at higher risk because of these things, because of the fact that there are certain things that are misunderstood and needs that are unmet for your race already, and then disability on top of that, or your gender and so forth. So it's really important that we look at all of these things and not just one. So when we're talking about things related to autism or ADHD, I think it's irresponsible for us if we don't look at the fact that aside from whatever circumstances that we might be facing in our own home or our life with our own children, it's not acceptable that X amount of Black and brown children with the same diagnosis are going to have out of school suspension, or are going to get the wrong diagnosis and not get the proper services, or going to be diagnosed late. That's just not acceptable. Even if it doesn't personally impact us, it's not something that I think we should be comfortable with. These things may not personally impact us, but they impact our society, and therefore, by default, peripherally, they're impacting us in some way or another. So we should care and ask these questions. And it shouldn't be, someone saying, well, this doesn't include me, or I don't understand this, or I don't see myself in this. It shouldn't be, the person shouldn't have to do that. Those of us who are around should be able to look and see what gaps are there, what's missing, what's not being addressed, what's not being mentioned here, and not wait for someone to be left out before we call attention to it or try to learn more about it or care more about it and talk about it.
So good. Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, just even on this show, we've been having a lot more conversations about intersectionality. I definitely feel like I've been doing this podcast for almost 6 years and, really been more involved in the neurodiversity movement. And I feel like there is good momentum around richer conversations, talking more about intersectionality, talking about the lived experience of many marginalized groups. Do you see good momentum in that area?
I see growth. I feel like it's before, I think it wasn't even a concept that people really spoke about or even were cognizant of. Now I think people are talking about it and they're asking questions, they're learning. I feel in some ways it's kind of performative because it's like people don't want to dig deeper. Being aware of it, it's like autism awareness is great, but we need acceptance. Awareness just means something exists. But you could hate it, like the KKK knows I exist. They're aware of me. And that's not a comforting feeling, because just because they're aware of me doesn't mean they accept me or like me or anything of that nature. So I think people are becoming more aware, but we need to kind of make more space to amplify the voices of those who are most impacted and to understand where we need to learn and grow, where we need to step back and be quiet, and where we need to step forward and provide, support and just kind of evolve. As humans, we're always growing, we're always learning, as living things. Our cells are new ones are being developed and other ones are dying and breaking down and so forth. And our knowledge needs to do the same. We should never be static. And so I think people find it disconcerting to realize that something they thought was one way is a different way, or that things have changed, or there's something problematic about something that they believed or that they knew, and people feel hurt and judged. And I don't think that we need to do that. We just need to let it, it's self-correcting. That's what we just need to do, is like acknowledge growth and keep it going, keep it moving.
Yeah, 100%. If it feels uncomfortable, lean into that discomfort, right? That's a sign that the growth is actually happening.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, I want to respect your time and wrap this up. First of all, I just want to say thank you for such a wonderful conversation. And listeners, there's so much more that we could have talked about. I mean, in researching and preparing for this interview, your body of work and the hats that you wear, it's really awe-inspiring how involved you are and what a leader you are. I would love if you could just tell listeners, if they want to learn more about your work, what's the best way for them to do that?
If you're on social media, I have to admit that I only use Twitter right now. So like, I feel like I have a TikTok account and all that because my kids do like every second, oh, Mom, look at this, look at this, look at this. Is this okay? But I can only have so much emotional bandwidth to keep up with content. So I am at Morénike Giwa, which is for like more Nike and then go on Twitter. I have a LinkedIn page. I don't really use much of my other social media accounts. They're just kind of stagnant there. Like my Instagram and Facebook just kind of sit there. But I do have a website, and it's Morénike Giwa. So like morenikegiwa.com. And on there, there's information about how to reach me. I'm involved with a number of different groups. And so I have some of the links to those organizations, because there might be something of interest that someone might want there. And then I have a resource page as well with some general information. One thing that I always like to point people to, if they go there, either to my page on the resources section, or they could just find it on their own by Googling. But there's a book list by Megan Ashburn, who is Not an Autism Mom, and her website is notanautismmom.com. And so she runs a book club about, neurodiversity and autism. And she has like more than 100 different books that, collectively members of the book club have suggested. And she's curated this list, and it's a really neat list. It's got books for little kids. It's got books for adults. It's got books in English and Spanish, and some, books that are related to certain topics. I just feel like it's really good, and people can check that list out. So, if they, again, it's linked on my page, we can find it elsewhere. If they just wanted to learn more, find out more resources about, neurodivergence and parenting and all of those things.
Yeah, listeners, definitely check out the resource page. It is very rich. There are a lot of links on there, all kinds of things, PDFs, websites, book suggestions. So that is a great way to learn more as well. All right. Well, Morénike, I just want to say thank you so much again. And I know you have a busy, full life. I'm going to let you get back to your day, but I just really appreciate everything that you shared with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. If you want to dig deeper into this episode, check out the show notes page. Every episode has a dedicated show notes page on my website where you can get links to all the resources we discussed, read a transcript, and even easily go back and listen to key takeaways by using the chapters feature on the podcast player. To get to the show notes page for this episode, just go to tiltparenting.com/podcast and select this show. If you love this podcast and want to help cover the cost of its production, please consider joining my Patreon campaign. For as little as $2 a month, you can help cover the cost of the hosting platform for this show, my wonderful new editor and producer, Andrea, and more. It's so easy to sign up. Just go to patreon.com/tiltparenting to learn more, or click on the Patreon link on any show notes page. If you're into social media, you can follow Tilt Parenting at Tilt Parenting on Instagram and Twitter. Visit the Tilt Parenting page on Facebook, or join my Facebook community called Tilt Together. Lastly, please help this podcast stay visible and easily found by subscribing and leaving a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you so much. And that's all for this week. Stay safe, stay well, and take good care. And for more information, visit www.tiltparenting.com.
If you're a parent, I invite you to join us at the Mindful Mama podcast, where it's all about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. With sometimes hilarious and always thought-provoking experts and friends, at Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have. And when you have calm and peace within, then you can give it to your children. I'm Hunter Clark Fields, and I can't wait to see you there. Listen in to the Mindful Mama podcast.